Now, Africa's economic growth has been turning heads, but the challenge remains as to whether the continent's economic growth can be done sustainably. Graham Sinclair and Richard Mwinga join us in studio, fresh from the Africa Investment Funds and Asset Management Conference, to provide further insights. So let's check the temperature on the ground. And how are pension funds treating the investment case for Africa?
We had some great presentations at the conference, and my takeaway would be we've moved from kind of the pessimism of the early 2000s through maybe the overhype of the last little while, and we're trying to settle on what is the reality and what's the hype, and making the distinction between the great demographics, the positive story we all buy into, but trying to map that to the actual business opportunities and the actual investment opportunities. Those are proving a bit harder to come by.
And Richard, the same sentiment coming from your quarters?
Yes, I think there is, just as Graham has said, I think there is positivity amongst institutional investors, pension funds, in looking into Africa because of the potential that Africa is providing at the moment. We do see quite a number of changes that will take place in this decade. In fact, you know, Africa has a population of over 1 billion. And of this population, 15% are young. And these favorable demographics imply quite a lot of things for institutional investors. There are products that need to be aligned to ensure that they meet the demands of these young people and the ever-growing population in Africa. And most of it, of course, is the status of middle class. A number of countries, more than 5 countries in Africa, I think have been declared as middle-income countries. And as such, there's a lot of potential investment instrument that actually these people will be looking for.
Graham, just to come to you there, I just wanted to, we've got this opportunity now to really showcase Africa. And I know, Richard, we've got the likes of John Oliphant at the GEP here, and I'm going to get you a question around what African pension funds are doing.
You've got to move away from acronyms. Government Employees Pension Fund, for the layperson out there, instead of GEP.
So we've got African pension funds that can use this opportunity to really market the continent. But Graham, doing this in a sustainable manner, it's a big thing. It seems to be a big thing here in South Africa and Africa. Not so much overseas is my take. So when we start talking to these institutional investors overseas, and getting them onto this concept of growing the continent in a sustainable manner, what's the sort of response been?
Yeah, so I'd give two comments to that question. Firstly, I've just come back from 2 months in the UK and the US, and I get a bifurcated view. I get everyone's willing to take the meeting on Africa, not a lot of people willing to take out the checkbook. Second issue is I'm finding a lot of investors, institutional investors, have moved forward in terms of integrating environment, social and governance factors, and others are still kind of very slow to adopt and follow that pattern. So both on the Africa case and the environment, social governance, the sustainability case, I've got this bifurcated view of what the market looks like offshore. I think maybe more important for us here in Africa is the question of what are the local investors, high net worth, retail, pension funds, are they investing in their own economies? And I think a great way forward in 2 ways is the private equity asset class. 10.5 billion of 22 billion asset class are invested in some way using environment, social and governance factors, according to Cinco research. And secondly, you mentioned the Government Employees Pension Fund. Well, they've got their responsible investment policy, their developmental investing policy they've had since 2011. They're actively looking to invest in Africa. They've committed to 500 million in the Pan-African Infrastructure Development Fund 2 and 500 million in the PIC Fund 1 in Sub-Saharan Africa.
Graham, they're making the point, Richard, that people will take the meeting on Africa, but you're not seeing the checkbooks coming to materialization. What are the key issues that are hindering that transfer of, or the checkbook coming to the table, so to speak?
The main issues are issues to do with governance. And governance is a critical part that institutional investors are trying to focus on even as they get into countries. Will they get their money? Will they get the returns in those countries that they're going? And Africa has been ranked that most of the countries, except one country, Rwanda, the bribery and corruption. And I know there are a lot of institutions that have been put in Africa, and African governments are trying to fight corruption. But the issue of governance is one of the key issues. The other is political stability. There need to be political stability so that there's continuity of the policies that are being put in place. Right now in Africa, most of the countries are following up this targeted inflation, and I think there has been quite a lot of strides that have been made by African countries in ensuring that inflation is stable. And we have seen that in many of these African countries like Zambia, Ghana, South Africa, Kenya, where actually there's single-digit inflation. And I think there's stability. Those are the issues that pension funds are going to be looking at. But you know, when you are investing, there are two issues. There's the risk that you have to determine, and also there is the return. How do you manage the risk, and how do you ensure that you get the returns from where you're going to make
And they do say higher the risk, the greater the returns in some instances. So,
I just had a question, Richard. We've heard John at the Government Employee Pension Fund talking about the need for South African and African pension funds to show other investors they're putting their skin in the game, so to speak. They're investing in the continent. I wanted to ask you, what's the degree of cooperation between associations like the one that you chair and other pension funds, big government pension funds in Africa? Is there anything that's been done at a multilateral level to work together to try and market and show outside investors that we're investing in the continent ourselves, so that they can take heart, or they can take, get the safety in that, just in terms of what you can do together to market the continent?
Yes, I think that's one of the key issues. In fact, I talked to John yesterday. Communicating of the opportunities that are available in Africa has not taken place very much, because many people do not know exactly what these opportunities are. Like the Government Employees Pension Fund, it has 5% allowance to invest within Africa, outside South Africa. And like in Zambia, we have for a bigger leeway. We have up to 30% in which actually we can invest our resources, our funds, outside the borders of the country. And we do believe this cooperation is very important. And as we started yesterday with John, I think it's an issue that we have to move forward to ensure that actually we market our continent.